Right, we're now joined by Ayesha Kajee, an international relations expert. Good afternoon to you, Ayesha. Thank you for joining us. I'm curious to hear your reaction to how the world has reacted to this arrest warrant by the ICC. The United States has called it outrageous. Israel, of course, calling it anti-Semitic as they have reacted the past couple of days. But are you surprised with how the geopolitics have influenced these reactions and the alliance partners?
No, not at all surprised. I think it was to be expected that both the United States and Israel would react with derision and with negativity towards these arrest warrants. I think that the International Criminal Court, however, has been very, very thorough in its investigation. That investigation has taken several years now. And of course, more recently, since last October 2023, the additional actions of the Israeli military were added to the charges that were already in the case before the ICC. And so the arrest warrants, I think, from an international humanitarian law perspective, are welcome. They're very, very substantiated and warranted. There is a file or files full of proof substantiating the allegations and now the charges against Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Gallant. And I think that the ICC has done its job, quite frankly. And I think if it were any other country, any other colonizing, occupying country, there would not have been this outcry. But because Israel has always traded on a so-called exceptionalism and has used the excuse of anti-Semitism to justify its actions in the occupied territories, it has gotten away with impunity thus far. And it was only to be expected that its major financier and major global supporter would still rally behind it. Unfortunately, that is the case. But it's encouraging to see that other countries in the global north, in the West, such as France, Spain, etc., have come out and said that they will uphold the warrant. So that warrant will be upheld, for example, if Mr. Netanyahu or Mr. Gallant were to actually go to Spain or France. They would actually arrest him. And that is encouraging news because they've shown, and as have many other countries around the world, including within the European Union, they've shown that they're actually respecting the institutions of the United Nations and the global institutions that were put into place by that very same world order.
I'm quite curious to see what will happen. I mean, the member states of the ICC are now obligated to act should Netanyahu travel to their countries. But what are the sanctions if a certain member country does not enact on this arrest warrant? Just what is the gravity of the responsibility for member states?
Well, gravity, again, in terms of international humanitarian ethical codes, is enormous. We saw something similar in South Africa a few years back when Omar al-Bashir of the Sudan was here. And there was a petition to the High Court in Gauteng. And in the interim, Mr. Bashir very rapidly left the country because South Africa did have an obligation under the ICC statute and as a member country, as a signatory to the Rome Statute, to actually arrest him. And that's why he left so suddenly. So it will be interesting to see how this plays out, whether any country does actually arrest Mr. Netanyahu or Mr. Gallant if they were to visit those countries. Of course, neither Israel nor the United States are signatories to the Rome Statute. The United States had signed it, and then George W. Bush, the Clinton administration, had signed it. And then the George W. Bush administration de-ratified it, so basically withdrew the signature. So neither the U.S. nor Israel are currently signatories, but it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Of course, most people upon whom there is this kind of sanction or this kind of arrest warrant hanging like a sword of Damocles would not dare visit countries that they thought would seek to enact the ICC warrant. So, it's a moot point right now because it's unlikely that Mr. Netanyahu, for example, would visit South Africa or even Spain or France.
It's quite interesting that you brought out the example of Omar because, that's where my question was actually coming from. But when we look at the arrest warrants, it's on both sides, Hamas and Israel. We speak of Dave, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Hamas having also responded, saying the arrest warrants remain limited and symbolic. But how important was it that the arrest warrants were issued on both sides? The EU called it a non-political decision that should be respected and implemented.
I think that was part of the reasoning on the part of the ICC, and it was clever reasoning, that what is seen to be both sides in the current genocide in Gaza and the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. You'll notice I don't call it a conflict because it cannot be called a conflict. There is no equitable playing field, and it is a genocide and an ethnic cleansing that is being carried out in occupied territory. So under international law, once again, Israel has a far greater responsibility to protect because it is the occupier. And that is one side of the issue. But I think the ICC was rather clever in basically, saying it's going after certain Hamas members as well for the atrocities committed on October 7th last year and since then. And this means that it, at least in theory, is seen to be fairly even-handed, even if, as I said, what is happening in occupied territory. So the responsibility on the occupier is far greater, particularly if you view Hamas as a response to occupation rather than, as it has been stigmatized, as a terror group.
Just very quickly, Ayesha, before I let you go, influence of Trump's presidency on the conflict in Gaza with Israel? Do you think Netanyahu should be worried?
I don't think we're going to see massive change in U.S. policy. We might see intensification of aid and support to Israel, as we saw during the previous Trump presidency. But in realpolitik terms, we're not going to see a change from the Trump administration. It has very, very clearly stated that it sees Israel as a major ally and a very critical ally in the Middle East. And that's not going to change anytime soon. So, what then comes into play is the question of culpability of third parties, those who finance and arm and otherwise support the atrocities being carried out in Gaza and in the West Bank. And particularly when it comes to, like the ICC warrant states, the use of starvation as a tool in genocide, as a means to implement genocide.